Welcome to Leaf Status Report for January 4th, 2026. Thanks in part to the newly configured Flick the Helpful Pigeon. I did not cut our simulation short today by accident. As such, we've simulated the rest of the NHL regular season the full 5,005 times, with the Leafs' performances across all simulations forming this distribution. Unfortunately, the Leafs did suffer a very heartbreaking overtime loss yesterday. They were up 3-2 with less than 3 minutes in the third period when Emil Heineman ended up scoring the game-tying goal that allowed Matthew Schaefer to score in overtime. But we did get a point from that. Unfortunately, the rest of our key games did not go well. The Penguins beat the Red Wings 4-1, which, while it does bring the Red Wings closer to the Leafs in today's expected points race, it also does allow the Penguins to pull away from the Leafs in the standings today. The Jackets beat the Sabres 5-1. That was slightly preferable. It does bring the Jackets within striking distance of the Leafs today, but it will pull the Sabres closer, so it will give the Leafs a bit of a better chance to catch the Sabres over the next couple days. The Devils beat the Mammoth 4-1. That's just an outright bad result for us. The same with the Flyers beating the Oilers 5-2. I didn't mention this game yesterday, but the St. Louis Blues beat Montreal 2-0, so that will also pull Montreal closer to the Leafs in today's projections, though we shouldn't be expecting them to catch them anytime soon. And I believe, finally, the Ottawa Senators beat the Winnipeg Jets 4-2, which, as with the other ones, will mean that the Senators will be pulling a little further away from the Leafs today. The Leafs lose 0.25 expected points today, going from 91.54 yesterday to 91.29 today. Interestingly enough, based on the theoretical value of expected points I've calculated for today, our simulations are still collectively overestimating the Leafs by about a quarter of an expected point. I will be looking into this later today to see if we've just gotten insanely lucky over the next couple days, or if there's some minor issues to work out in either my theoretical value calculation or in the way I've been running my simulations, but I will get back to all of you tomorrow on that. As always, our expected points change breaks down into 4 controllable factors and randomness. First, because the Leafs were expected to score 1.15 points against the Islanders in last night's game, but they lost in overtime, we see a loss of 0.15 expected points from game result alone. Substituting the Leafs game data from yesterday into today's simulations yielded a loss of 0.06 expected points. Substituting the rest of yesterday's game data into today's simulations yielded a loss of 0.04 expected points. And we had one additional overtime game per simulation than we did yesterday, which gave us 0.03 expected points back. Overall, this allows us to conclude that randomness favored the Leafs by 0.03 expected points less today than it did yesterday. The minimum number of points we saw the Leafs score in a season today was 70, and the maximum number of points we saw them score in a simulation today was 115. That gives us an absolute range today of 45 points. Our inner 70% interval goes back to what it was 2 days ago. Our 15th percentile season was 85 points, and our 85th percentile season was 97 points, which of course gives us an overall 70% range of 12 points. Our standard deviation continues to shrink, as we should expect it to whenever the Leafs play another game. Yesterday it was 5.99 points, and today it's gone down to 5.85 points. The Leafs lose 2.9% on their playoff odds today. Yesterday they made the playoffs in 37.5% of all simulations, and today they've made the playoffs in only 34.6% of all simulations. Our 95% confidence interval for these playoff odds sits at 1.32%. Looking at the general EP spread across the entire league, unfortunately, the Leafs have fallen to 19th place in total expected points. However, there are still 19 teams within one standard deviation of the Leafs in expected points. Beyond this, only 6 of those 19 teams are below the Leafs, with the other 13 sitting above. That does mean that the Leafs are a lot more poised to chase teams down in the expected points race than they are to be chased down. Consulting the table, unfortunately, the Leafs have dropped from wildcard 5 down to wildcard 7 in our expected points projections today. However, I would argue that in some metrics, the Leafs look better in terms of their playoff prospects than they did yesterday, even if their playoff odds have also dropped slightly. This might just be Leafs copium, but you know. Anyway, running over the basic margins first, the Leafs now sit 18.44 expected points behind the division-leading Tampa Bay Lightning, 5.75 expected points behind second in the Atlantic, still held by Montreal, 3.04 expected points behind third in the Atlantic, which is now held by Ottawa, and they now sit only 1.56 expected points behind our wildcard 2 team, which is now the Florida Panthers, which of course is our margin outside of the playoffs. Now, as I was saying, in a lot of metrics, the Leafs are actually looking a bit better than they did yesterday. Mostly, I'm referring to the fact that a lot of those margins that would shimmy the Leafs into the playoffs are closer. The bad news, of course, is there are more teams that the Leafs have to contend with to chase down. However, the margin on the teams they'd have to chase down is thinner. Obviously, that A1 gap has widened, but we aren't really expecting the Leafs to catch the Tampa Bay Lightning at this point. The A2 gap has thinned. It has slightly dropped below 1 standard deviation, which it was not yesterday. That A3 gap has also thinned. It's a different team, of course, but even that A3 team yesterday is now in a wild card position, which does put the Leafs in a decent chance to chase the Red Wings down now. So overall, more teams to chase down, thinner margins, which does mean that we're heavily relying on a lot of other teams to do poorly in addition to the Leafs winning a good chunk of their games over the next couple weeks. Now, let's look at where the Leafs actually finished in all of our simulations. Overall, it's a reasonably constant distribution except for that A1 spot, which is fairly unsurprising because we kind of already are expecting they'll never chase down the Lightning at this point. However, interestingly enough, their most common finish is actually A3 right now. Mind you, it's just a little over a 10% chance of happening, and their playoff prospects are far outweighed by the fact that they're pretty constant in finishing from anywhere in the wildcard pack because of how close it is right now. But still, we are seeing some decent prospects for a divisional finish, even if those prospects are very, very, very gradually slipping away as the season progresses. Now, of course, just as a little bit of a closer zoom in, conditional of the Leafs actually making the playoffs, their expected seed sits in these proportions. There are about 3 key games happening tonight. Starting at 2 p.m., the Dallas Stars host the Montreal Canadiens in what's arguably, inarguably, the least consequential of these 3. This game really only matters if Montreal loses by multiple goals, because they're already so far ahead of the Leafs that we need that gap to close by a considerable margin before we can really start talking about the Leafs being able to catch the Montreal Canadiens if they win a game. At 3 p.m., the Columbus Blue Jackets play the Pittsburgh Penguins. There is no best outcome for this game other than this game not going to overtime and awarding an extra point to whichever team loses. At 5 p.m., the Florida Panthers play the Colorado Avalanche. The Florida Panthers have an expected points yield below 1, and they sit ahead of the Leafs, so the only thing we'll be happy with is if they lose in regulation. Mind you, that gap is small enough that I think we'd be happy if they lost by any margin, but obviously the more goals they lose by, the better. Quickly looking at the rest of the Canadian teams, there's not a lot to talk about. Obviously, the Edmonton Oilers and Montreal drop by considerable margin in the playoff odds today. However, I don't think that really changes how I view them in these projections. The Ottawa Senators gain almost 10% on their odds, and that puts them above a coin flip now. Now, given that they're currently sitting in the 7th wildcard spot in reality, that might be a bit surprising. However, of course, it is worth noting that they've also they are still pacing fairly close to wildcard 1. The Pittsburgh Penguins have the best points percentage in the wildcard race right now, and the Ottawa Senators are only pacing 2 points behind them. So I don't think it's unreasonable for the Ottawa Senators to have an over 50% chance to make the playoffs right now. President's Trophy.